Noe Valley at that time was working class, so you could afford to buy a house, which is impossible, as you know now. And in that neighborhood were a lot of people who were Irish Catholic or Swedish and artists. And it was like maybe it seemed to me that there were like about a third of the people that I knew were actually working artists, sculptors, and um, and we all knew each other. And you just it was the kind of thing where we had co-ops going, and all the artists belonged to co-ops. We would share whatever we had. And then there was the music, which was unbelievable in Golden Gate Park. So there was this feeling that anything and everything could happen, and it actually did, which was really quite a lot of fun. So my husband, who also taught piano, knew Ruth and was teaching her kids. And he brought me to meet her and Albert, her husband, probably a couple of weeks after we got married. And a relationship started from that. I then proceeded in a row to have two kids. And every time I did, she would come over and draw me because I couldn't leave the house. I had a problem being pregnant both times, even though my kids turned out to be great. So I was on bed rest and I was a captive audience for her. So she did lots and lots of drawings. At the same time, she was doing masks of people using plaster. They were death masks, essentially, except we were all alive. And all of our faces ended up on the wall going into her house. Started out with her using bandages that you use for if you have a broken arm, that are wet plaster embedded bandages. And she did a whole body sculpture of me from that. And from that, it went to plaster. And from there, it went to wax. And from there, it went to bronze. The fountain is called Andrea. There are two mermaids in it. She used, this is a crown that she made for me for my 60th birthday. Oh, you should maybe see. This is what I looked like then. Had that look that she was looking for, sort of a Madonna look, though I wasn't really very Madonna-like. And then when I was 60, she made this crown for me for my birthday using the looped wire. And that's what she used for the tail. What happened is it went up in the middle of the night. Larry Halpern was hugely annoyed with it. He started a big to-do. He wrote the mayor. People voted on it, whether or not they wanted to keep it. But it's been there now for 50 years. There was a poll in the newspaper. It was pretty hysterical, actually. It's the most photographed thing at Ghirardelli Square. She had 6 children, and they all were going to Alvarado School. And she was offended by those, it's Christmas, let's color a candy cane, in the lines, or it's Thanksgiving, let's color the turkey within the lines, that kind of thing. And she wanted to let the children have experience with real artists. So she started one summer just going in there with a couple of friends and doing God's eyes, I think, and baker's dough, which baker's dough is water and flour and salt. And they started making figures and so forth. She ultimately made a huge fountain of that's in Union Square in San Francisco at the new Apple building, actually. And she used the kids, and she made scenes of the whole of San Francisco on this big fountain. And then it was at the foundry and made into a bronze. I started working with her the next year. And what we would do was we would get all the artists in the neighborhood to come in and work with the kids. So there were big mosaics that the kids made. Gardening was also a huge part of what she did. And we had animals, turkeys. We had a turkey that the kids named Salve Regina. She used to lay great big eggs. And then there would be cooking, which she also considered one of the arts. At one point we probably had 50 parents who were coming into the schools. But it was a time when moms were home with their kids. And it was, you could live in San Francisco on not very much money. And as long as that prevailed, we had lots and lots of parent input. And the school project went from Alvarado School to the junior high to the high school. And pretty soon it was within maybe 5 years, it was in, I would think, maybe 30 schools. And amazing, amazing things happening. And ultimately, that grew into the School of the Arts, which Ruth was very intent on having, and which shockingly was not on the agenda of the Board of Education, because San Francisco, at that point, art was huge there. There were lots of happenings. Are there still happenings going on in your lives? Do you know what a happening is? This is a happening that somebody who was involved with the program did. His name was Mel Henderson. He taught sculpture at San Francisco State, and he was very charismatic and fun, really, really fun. He gave as a class task. They were all to go all over the city and dial a yellow cab. This is pre-cell phones. This is in like 1969, maybe. A yellow cab, and everybody was to meet at the corner of Castro and Market in their cab. So we all hired cabs, and then there were no drones, pre-drones. There's a plane who's videoing it from the top, filming it, not video, from the top. And you begin to see little yellow cabs, but they just look like little yellow blobs starting to converge. And there was a massive traffic jam of yellow cabs. And that was a happening. There were lots of them. He did it. They were used politically and sometimes just for fun, but often to make a point. Anyway, those were the kinds of people who were involved in this program. So you never quite knew what was going to happen. But Asmara was talking about Buckminster Fuller, who's very well known if you're into architecture, and what he was, domes were becoming very big at that time in the 60s. People were building houses from domes and so forth. And he used to come to Alvarado and hang out with Ruth and the kids. And the kids would all save their milk cartons, and we'd wash them out, and there'd be a huge pile of milk cartons. And then they'd use staplers and put them together to make a dome, or sometimes not make a dome. Because if you put one thing wrong when you're making a dome, the whole thing collapses. There was a lot of trial and error that went on. Ruth was very big on saying it's okay to make a mistake. She didn't believe that a mistake should, not a mistake. She didn't even call them mistakes. Something would happen, it wouldn't quite work out. Well, just try it a different way. So that was a big thing that she taught. Served me very, very well as my life went on and it changed. I had to go to work at some point because it just became too expensive to not have a couple of incomes in San Francisco. And I think that was the single big lesson maybe that artists bring to the community, to the culture of life, that things don't always have to work the first time. You can keep going until you make it work. Or sometimes you find out it's never going to work. That happens as well. I think, looking back on that time, what was happening was there was this infusion of creative life in the schools, and all of a sudden, schools that had been very gray and grim took on amazing color and beauty. She believed that you had to show up. If you were really interested in something and you wanted to make it happen, you really had to show up. And she did. She would take me with her. It was deadly, these Board of Education meetings. And she'd be sketching the whole time, and I'd be trying to pay attention. But she was there, and her presence was noted always. She ended up then on the Arts Commission, where she began to have more. She was very actually well known in San Francisco, and her early career, her work, she had galleries in New York that were selling her work. Rockefeller bought her work when she was very, very young. And then there was a long hiatus when she was working with her and raising her family. She worked only long, though, on her work. So people were buying her work in San Francisco, and she went to those people initially to get funding. And they were famous people. So she would go to Zellerbach, which is a big paper making company, and get all of their remnant rolls, which we would then use in our work. So she used it for materials, her contacts, and she also used it for, would you just write us, we just need a small check. Only she'd say it very quietly, and then you'd have a check. She was very good at that. But as you all know, ultimately you have to make connections to make whatever you want to happen. You have to put in that time and energy. The going after materials thing then grew into a project called Scrap, which was a big warehouse, and people were invited to bring all their leftover materials that could be used for art. And that's still going on right now.
And so she used her success and fame to serve the community and serve values that she cared about.
Yes. Yeah.
And she had an interesting relationship to money. She was very frugal. In the book, it says that she spent $5 on a haircut once. She never bought a haircut, and she was regretting it for years that she spent that $5, and that she didn't make a lot of money from her work. But she didn't see that as a problem because she said it's the privilege of the artist to create it. So on the mermaid statue, whatever commission she received, the bronze was so expensive, it just went kind of back into the artwork. Right. But at the end of her life, her work started selling for $1 million. So some of these sculptures are selling for $1 million. So you have a story about one piece.
Yes. So I don't know if you're seeing this piece now.
I'll show. If
yeah, this is a tied wire sculpture, and there's a close up of how it was done. She gave this sculpture to KQED, which was our educational TV station, in 1968. And they had an art auction on the air, and you could call in and bid on whatever you wanted. And then that money would go to the station. And she had donated this piece. And I was watching the auction when this piece happened to come up.
And what year was this?
This is in 1968. And it was going for way too little money. So I bid it up. And then it closed out and I got the bid. And we lived at that time on $300 a month. You know, my husband was an artist. I wasn't working. The mortgage was like $87 and the rest went for food or whatever. But we didn't have any savings. And I freaked out because
it was $300.
It was $300 that we didn't have. And I had just had the baby that, you know, made the mermaid thing happen. And my husband was in Texas or something at that point, and I was wondering what I was going to say. This is pre-credit cards, and you had 3 days to bring the money to the station and pick up what you purchased. And Ruth had already called me to say she saw I had bought it, how happy she was. And I had no idea what I should do. And the next day in the mail was a check from my mother, who was in New York, for $300 for the baby, which of course I promptly spent on the sculpture. And then it always had pride of place wherever I lived, hung on the wall. I moved to Hawaii. I had a career in politics. I ran political campaigns and other things. And I had just enough money to retire here. And at some point, it's so expensive to live in Hawaii, I needed more and decided to sell this a couple of years ago. And it sold for $750,000, which is like, oh my God. Of course, the government got half of it and the gallery got a quarter of it, but I used it to take my family on a trip to Sicily, which was great fun. But that's a little fairy tale, a little Ruth tale.
And because your family has Italian roots and your children had never
Right.
been to Italy.
Right.
Yeah.